New York Assembly member Claire Valdez is a union organizer, a proud Democratic socialist, and she just won the Democratic primary for New York's 7th Congressional District with well over 50% of the vote, beating the establishment's chosen successor, who is backed by the retiring incumbent, by over 20 points. And come November, she is all but certain to be a member of Congress. And she joins me today. Claire, welcome to Breakthrough News Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure to get you on. This is so exciting, the shifts that we're seeing, and it's very much represented in your primary win. And I want to start on an issue that I think has been central to all of this. You know, these Democratic primaries across the country, including your own, have really been defined and continue to be defined by where candidates stand on Israel's genocide in Gaza, which you have been very outspoken about. And, you know, that does speak to the fact that the base of the Democratic Party has shifted quite dramatically. But at the same time, party leadership has stayed so committed to Israel. And, you know, your primary became, I think, a symbol of that collision in many ways. So I wanted to start by asking, why do you think Palestine, of all issues, is playing such a central role in Democratic primaries from, New York all the way to Colorado?
Yeah, I think for me, this is one of the great moral questions of our time. And I think right now what people are really hungry for is consistency and honesty from politicians. You know, people felt and continue to feel very pushed out of the democratic process. They don't feel like their vote matters. And I think that is part and parcel of this bigger idea that, our politicians are not serving us. They don't care about what's happening on the ground. And I think there's a general sense that, like, if you can't stand for Palestinian freedom and Palestinian human life and dignity, how on earth are you going to stand for the dignity of working class people right here in your own district? We want to see real consistency on this issue. I think especially following I think we've seen the opinion shift on this as the genocide has unfolded. 75,000 people have been murdered, millions have been displaced. I think especially following the illegal bombing of Iran, the murder of hundreds of school children, the list of atrocities goes on and on. People are also seeing a direct impact in their pocketbooks. They're seeing the prices of gas and other, household goods go up as a result of these forever wars. And just a real deep sense that, we have money to bomb poor people abroad, refugee camps abroad, but somehow we don't have enough money for healthcare or for free higher public education. Our lives aren't getting better, and at the same time, lives are being destroyed overseas. And I think that dissonance is also something that people are really coming to in this moment. And they want to see politicians who will have the political courage to say those things and to stand up against it.
It's fantastic. And, I am speaking to you right now from Lebanon, where my family's from and where I live most of the year. And as I'm sure you know, Israel has killed over 4,300 people here since March 2nd. It's occupying the South. You have the Trump administration just overseeing this surrender deal that really cements this occupation and conditions reconstruction aid on the Lebanese army going to war with Hezbollah on Israel's behalf. And it's pretty awful. But, the whole point is none of that is possible without U.S. weapons, U.S. diplomatic cover, and quite a bit of U.S. bullying. And one thing I really love about your platform is that you talk about pushing to end all weapons sales and military aid to Israel. And so I'm curious if you can talk a bit about what that would actually look like. Would that be like a full arms embargo? And I ask that because, some Democrats want to kind of split the difference. They'll say, let's block offensive weapons, for example, but keep funding defensive weapons like the Iron Dome. So is that a distinction that you accept?
No, I don't. I think we have to end all aid to Israel, and that's following our own laws too. Israel is clearly and openly violating international law, has been committing a genocide now for almost 3 years. This is really simple. Our tax dollars should not be going to uphold genocide, apartheid, occupation, point blank. And so I don't see a difference between offensive and defensive weaponry. All of that money is going toward enabling a state that is committing genocide, that is leading us into wars in Iran, that is displacing people in Lebanon, And, just want to say too, solidarity, and I hope that you and your family and your friends and everyone you care about are safe. But this
I
is
really appreciate
a result, of course, but this is a result of a long history of the United States writing blank checks to Israel, and now the theater of their violence and their colonialism has spread to Lebanon, to Iran, to the rest of the region, and that would not have been possible, as you said, without the United States funding it. And so we have to remove all aid. Period.
And then, I mean, maybe this is, I don't know how much people discuss this, but would you support a scenario where there be perhaps like sanctions against Israel in the way that there were sanctions against apartheid South Africa?
Absolutely. I know. I think like all kind of, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and a lot of like diplomatic tools. Sanctions can be diplomatic tools. And in the same way that we sanctioned South Africa during their apartheid regime, I think we should be looking at those tools now in this moment. And certainly we shouldn't be punishing, people who've been supporting boycott, divestment sanctions here in the United States for a long time as, again, non-violent efforts to make the Israeli government cease their operations in the West Bank, the genocide in Gaza, and many other atrocities.
Well, so that's a good maybe segue into talking a little bit about the Democratic Party, where I think you're probably going to get some pushback from these people you're going to be working with. And you one thing I really love is that you've made this point of connecting our bloated budgets for imperialism, military industrial complex, connecting that to our lack of adequate access to things like housing and Medicare for all, and this need to abolish ICE. And again, it's really exciting to see someone with your politics win a seat this consequential. But our audience is very left, and they've watched this on more than one occasion. That is, people getting into Congress as Democrats with these insurgent politics, only to see the establishment apply extreme pressure, and then maybe slowly see the party change the person who's gone into it instead of the other way around. And I'm sure you've watched this happen too. So I guess my question is, what's your theory for how you would avoid that? Is it DSA accountability, the union base, the movement outside Congress? Like, what actually keeps you anchored? Because I can only imagine that that sort of pressure I'm talking about has maybe already even started to target you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all the things you already said. I'm a proud member of New York City DSA. I've been a member for 7 years, was in chapter leadership, kind of came through the rank and file of DSA, as we like to say. Same thing with my union. I started as just a rank and file member of my union, became a bargaining committee member, shop steward. These are my political homes. These are the places that I learned how to be an organizer, that I built political power, not just for myself, but for the people on the shop floor with me. And I feel a real deep responsibility toward the movement that won me this seat. I did not do this by myself. Thousands and thousands of people came out to volunteer, to donate, to spend time. And I think real accountability means acknowledging that, I'm not just some person, I'm part of a movement. And so I think there will be all kinds of pressure from the Democratic establishment, from who even knows, lobbyists, to vote in particular ways, to behave in certain ways. And my commitment is really to the movement, is to be making decisions in concert with folks on the outside, because that's how we build, that's how we win. I can't do this by myself going in alone. And I think making sure that we're staying grounded in the movements, that we're in constant communication, and working with, the colleagues that I'm going to be very excited to be working with, Daria-Liza Villeshev-Allier, Millet Kiros, Chris Rabb, Adam Hamoy. Like, people are winning across the country right now, and we have a really profoundly exciting freshman class that's coming in very soon. And so I think a lot of the work that I want to do too is make sure that we all stay together, that we're organizing together, that we're building power, because we multiply that force when we do it together. So I think there's a few like inside outside strategy things to kind of think through, but I also really hear people's suspicion and worry about co-optation. We've seen it happen before, but I think the movement on the outside is in a very strong position right now to hold us accountable. And like, being strong in Palestine isn't just like morally right, it's politically powerful right now. And I think those two things in concert really change the game for what we can achieve.
Yeah, it's super exciting hearing you say all those names one after each other, and hopefully there's even more to come to be able to join
Yeah.
that slate you just named. But and you mentioned it. I know that there's this long running sort of debate within DSA about whether at some point there needs to be this kind of like break with the Democratic Party, whether it's a so-called dirty break that happens gradually or a clean break or maybe no break at all. This notion that the Democratic Party is this, party of war, of corporations, a place where historically we've watched social movements sometimes go to die. And so at some point, the working class would need to maybe form its own party. And, I think that notion would definitely resonate with our audience here at Breakthrough, which, like I said, is quite left, and which has seen the role that this party played during the genocide. So I just wonder where you've fallen on this in the sense that, where does your own perspective go, or where's your own perspective now, I should say, that you're likely to be headed to Congress as a Democratic candidate?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question and one that I've like really grappled with in my time within DSA. I think for me, I always come back to the power and the necessity of the labor movement. And right now, at the height of the labor movement, it was like almost 1 in 3 workers was in a union. Now it's like 1 in 10. I mean, it's an absolute catastrophe. And I think as we've seen the decline of union density and labor power in the United States, we've seen the rise of like corporate Democratic Party. And so I think we can't even begin to tackle the idea of like what would the base for a new independent perhaps workers party be at this point. I think we have to like really focus on rebuilding the labor movement, organizing the working class in all the ways that we can, and make sure that that's the real like beating heart of whatever the future has in store for us. It's one of the primary reasons I wanted to run for Congress in the first place. We can't have a thriving democracy. We can't beat fascism. We can't win an anti-war movement if the labor movement is in decline and if working class people are not, empowered to take on the conditions that are misering themselves in their own workplace. So I think that's for me the thing that I think about the most. And I think that kind of our most immediate task in front of us.
Yeah. And then now that the Democratic establishment side is, saying things like, for example, you've got James Carville. I'm sure you saw he threw a temper tantrum saying it's time for Democrats to talk about the S word schism, that there's, quote, some stuff I can't be in the same tent with. So it sounds like now there's at least some segment of the Democratic Party machine that's discussing a question of a break with DSA. And then there's kind of a deeper version of this critique that I hear from some people in our audience, which is, if DSA's politics are so different from the Democratic parties, which clearly they are, like why run inside of it at all? And you kind of alluded this earlier with the sort of inside outside strategy. So the question becomes, why not build outside? And personally, from my end, like I don't think it has to be either or. I think movements need to use every tool available, and these primaries are definitely one of those tools. But the Democratic Party does have this long history of, like I mentioned earlier, being where movements go to die, and it ends up kind of absorbing the energy, and then that energy can end up disappearing. So I guess I'm just curious, maybe to elaborate a little bit, how you think about that,
About the cooptation from the Democratic
about
Party.
the sort of inside outside debate, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the inside outside strategy I think is really important to the work that we're going to do. Like I said, like I can't go to Congress and like fix things. And also, I think what we've seen in the past is absent a really like strong movement on the outside, people get co-opted really quickly. And I was in the state legislature for a couple of years. I see at least on the state level how the democratic machinery, how lobbyists, how, there are all these other kind of like structures within legislative bodies that will write legislation for you, that will, help you fundraise, that will help make your life a lot easier. And what DSA has been doing really successfully for the past few years is building an alternative to that, is building an independent alternative to all of those structures. We help draft legislation, we strategize together, we think through the big questions of the day. And that provides us a lot of independence and a lot of like ability to take risks together too, because we're not reliant on these other structures that can like, carrot and stick us. We've got each other. And that's really powerful. I think that's the thing, that's the kind of like inside strategy work that we have to do, but that relates to the outside. We have regular meetings with DSA every week on the state level with, chapter leadership, but like campaign leadership too. So we're staying in conversation about, taxing the rich or whatever campaigns are going on at the moment. I think that's really essential, and it's something that hasn't totally existed at the congressional level yet. But I think with so many freshmen coming in, we have a real opportunity to try and build that kind of infrastructure to work together. And that's what I'm really excited about. It really presents a new frontier for, the socialist left to be organizing within the halls of power in concert with the movement on the ground that's also, growing and really hungry for changes, for like a systemic deep changes to the political status quo.
Yeah, maybe we'll see like a DSA caucus inside Congress. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? We're cooking.
I one, one thing that did make me smile, and I think a lot of people smile, was that you declined to commit to supporting Hakeem Jeffries for speaker, saying there would need to be some conversations. A lot of the people on the left loved hearing that, since Jeffries is one of the biggest recipients of corporate PAC and, of course, AIPAC aligned money in the party. And I think his pro-Israel record does reflect that. And then at your own victory party, the crowd chanted "You're next" when he came on screen. So my question for you is, what would it take for him to get your vote? What are those conversations? Are there like concrete demands on Palestine or anything else that Jeffries would have to meet?
I think those considerations are still they're still ongoing, and I haven't had that conversation with the speaker yet, so I don't want to spill too
Fair.
much tea. We're gonna get to stay strategic, but I do think what we're seeing across the country is all these progressive. People are not just winning, but they're beating incumbents who have taken APAC money, and the writing is on the wall. And I think that we're demonstrating that in so many of these races, but I think it's also it should be apparent at this point to the Democratic Party leadership that AIPAC is toxic, that funding for Israel is deeply unpopular from the among the base, and that changes need to happen. So we'll see. We'll have those conversations with Congressman member Jeffries in the future, but I think like every incumbent Democrat should be paying attention to this moment right now, and would do well to understand where the base is.
Awesome. Well, we're definitely going to be following that story. And then, something else that recently came out was that, I'm sure you saw Axios reported last week that Kamala Harris called Mayor Zohran Mamdani and has been quietly meeting with pro-Palestine activists, including a co-founder of the Uncommitted movement, basically laying the groundwork for I don't even know what, in 2028, another potential run, something along those lines. But the fact that she's calling these people at all is I think some sort of admission of the movement's power here. But this is also the same woman who wouldn't move an inch on the genocide in Gaza, even as that basically helped cost her the election in 2024. So, if a Democrat like Harris is the nominee, let's say in 2028, can you see yourself backing that person in the spirit of like blue no matter who? Or does the movement kind of have to set a price there, do you think?
I think we have to see where the movement lands and what the field shapes up to be. I'll say like we have to be what the work that I'm interested in doing right now for the next couple of years is setting the agenda for what the 2028 elections will look like, no matter who runs. It will be unforgivable to me if the Democratic primary field does not adopt Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage, ending funding for Israel, like really basic and again deeply popular political demands from the working class around the country. We have to be setting the tone for what those campaigns will look like. And if we have to paint every single candidate into a corner on this, like that's what we have to do. But it's really essential that, the left, the progressives who are winning while we have the wind at our backs, that we're setting the agenda. And it has to be an agenda that centers working class people, whether you live in New York or Nevada, or if you live in Rafah, like we have to be centering human life. We have to be centering the idea that these big corporations, these billionaires or first trillionaire are not the friends of the working class. We have to take them on. And if Democrats don't understand that, we're going to lose this election again. And we don't have time for this. Like we don't have time for candidates to be mealy mouthed about on which side they're on. It's really straightforward. And I'm committed to organizing as much as I can, within the body, outside of the body, to make sure that this is the political program that we're coming to 2028 with. And I won't be backing a candidate if they're not part of that program.
Well, and I mean, to speak to the urgency of the moment that you're talking about, I mean, we've got all these socialist candidates winning these Democratic primaries, which is pretty unprecedented, right, in our lifetimes and very exciting. But it's also as you have this kind of like very strong growth on the far right as well. And, you saw over July 4th weekend, Trump basically turned America's 250th birthday into a Red Scare. He warned of a communist menace that he called a greater threat than 9/11. And he described the left as a cancer that needs to be cut out. You have some people who call themselves Democrats, like John Fetterman, having echoed some of that stuff, also saying that Democrats are drifting firmly into communism. But about the Trump administration specifically, I mean, this administration has already been attacking organizing and basically any speech to its left in really scary ways. How dangerous do you see this moment, and what should the Democratic Party be doing about it?
I think it's a really dangerous moment for honestly the entire working class. Trump, James Carville, like I forgot he existed, but like John Fetterman, like so many people are saying things like, we're this, evil communist wave of people were more dangerous than XYZ. Like the thing that's actually endangering not, the working class, not just here, but around the world, are these massive multi-billion-dollar corporations. It's the profound corporate greed of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. It's, the union busting that's happening, whether you work at Starbucks or Amazon or Walmart. Like, this is the thing that is profoundly dangerous right now. And when I talk about like we don't have time, I'm talking about the many different crises that we're facing, not just an affordability crisis, not just the forever wars, but climate change. We just endured, 100-degree weather here in New York City for the past few days. There's a huge heat wave in France that killed, I don't know, so many people. We're not ready to face, this is the profound crisis that is facing our planet right now. And Republicans and Democrats want to point to the left as something that should be that people should be frightened of, but we're putting forward a program in which working class people's lives are centered, in which war profiteers don't get to make billions of dollars displacing people and murdering people abroad. We're talking about housing as a human right, healthcare as a human right, public education, public transit, a federal jobs guarantee, a 4-day work week. We're talking about the good life for working class people. And the Trump administration wants to do this divide and conquer rhetoric where they try and make us to be the bad guys or really scary. But the truth is they're frightened because we're winning. We're winning these elections, but we're also winning over the working class right now. And so they should continue to be afraid. I'm glad they're afraid. And we'll keep organizing until we win the world we deserve.
Well, that one thing that I really appreciate that you use in your platform is the word imperialism. You say you'll stand against imperialism. You mentioned in Latin America and for Puerto Rican self-determination. And again, I love that you actually use the word imperialism here. You've also condemned the murders that Southcom has committed in the Caribbean, that this administration has committed in the Caribbean, and you called the kidnapping of Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro illegal. You've come out against the horrific, suffocating blockade of Cuba. And I mentioned that to just give you an opportunity to say, our audience really cares deeply about Latin America, as they do the whole world. What is your general approach, I guess, to Latin America, Venezuela, Cuba? Because so many times, like, you will see people in that sort of insurgent candidate category fall into this trap where like they end up getting hounded in the media to like condemn all the dictators, and it ends up distracting from the broader issue of like we are sanctioning and destroying these countries.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think people try to paint us into a corner on these issues, but it's very simple. We're talking about the working class of the world, and the working class of Venezuela and Cuba, of Puerto Rico deserve self-determination. They deserve the good life. They deserve a planet that is habitable. And we have so much more in common with them than we do with the billionaires who are trying to privatize Puerto Rico, the billionaires who are insisting on sanctioning Venezuela. it's really straightforward, and I'm going to stand with working class people no matter where they live. Um, and I think it's really important that we are electing candidates, we're electing members of Congress in the belly of the beast who understand and grapple with the United States' long history of empire and colonialism, of violent extraction, of coups, of forever wars, and takes that history really seriously because it's here in our present, you know? And this, I talked about this a little bit on the campaign, but this is really personal to me. I'm Native American, I'm Mexican American. My family's history was shaped by all of those same forces, by the violent, the border. Um, we have so much more in common with each other than we do with the billionaires who are oppressing us. And until we really foreground that fact and to understand this history, we can't do anything to change it. So I think that's a really important perspective, and I'm glad we're electing people to Congress now who will grapple with that and will take it seriously and will not kind of fall into these right-wing talking points that get us maybe out of the media cycle, but I think that don't tell truth to power and don't try to address the real root causes of displacement and immigration and like mass poverty and starvation that the United States has had a real hand in inflicting for hundreds of years, for 250 years.
For 250 years.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
So I guess what I'd want to end on here is, I mean, this kind of wraps all together in the sense of, you mentioned climate change earlier and that being like the most urgent issue. And one thing that's super interesting about your platform is you call for de-escalating the US Cold War posture towards China and also reducing US military bases. And you put all of that in the context of climate change, which is so important. So I guess I wanted to ask you what that means in practice, especially as you see like every Pentagon paper written about how like the coming war with China is like the next most important thing to happen.
I think it goes back to what I was saying before. I think there are talking heads and politicos who have a real vested interest in, trying to foment a Cold War, maybe even a hot war. I don't think that the working class wins in either scenario. We have to be really focused on the things that are actually threats to humankind right now: climate change, the possibility of future pandemics, and what that will require is real, true global cooperation and solidarity, and being a good neighbor. The United States should be a good neighbor to the rest of the world. We have, again, had this long history of extraction and violence, colonialism, and we can turn a page on that. We can draw down our military presence around the world. We can show that we want to be a good neighbor. And in doing so, not only are we advancing, we're moving the ball on climate change, we're, building relationships that I think will help, like really build democracy around the world. But we'll also be bringing the resources back to our communities that we so desperately need. We need hospitals and education. We need good union jobs. We need to be building, climate resiliency here in the United States. All of that takes money, and right now we're just pouring it into bases around the world that have no purpose anymore. And I think we need to be signaling to the rest of the world that we want to be cooperative and we want to be join hands in this moment when there are true existential threats to this planet.
Yeah, well, I would certainly much rather that money go towards not having to spend $250 on like an X-ray,
Amen.
rather than pouring it into contracts for Lockheed Martin. But Claire Valdez, thank you so much for joining me and answering all these questions. Appreciate you so much. Really excited to see what you end up doing in Congress, and hope to have you on again in the future.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for having me. I really love this conversation. Solidarity forever. Free Palestine.